my wife's family is unbelievably poor. This person married me with the intention of going after my money. You know? What nonsense is this person spouting off? I'm already disappointed with your pathetic personality, and now you're adding insult to injury. If you truly believe that, why don't you be the one to initiate a divorce? My husband's family is so rich. He's lived a privileged life in a large and affluent house since he was a child. In contrast, I grew up in a single-parent family after losing my father at a young age. Although my family home has a large garden, it's quite old, about 50 years. However, thanks to my mother's hard work and determination, we never had to live in poverty, and I was able to pursue higher education. I met my husband when we were in university. Just as I graduated from university, he proposed to me. I was really concerned because our family backgrounds were so different. I didn't want to cause my husband any trouble because of me, but he reassured me with a sincere attitude, saying, "I don't mind about that at all." When we visited his parents to introduce ourselves, they accepted our marriage without any objection. Things really went smoothly until we got married. I even had the illusion that things would continue like that after marriage. I was really naive. If I had been more discerning about men, I wouldn't have had to go through so much trouble. While we were dating, I perceived my husband as a kind-hearted person who treated everyone equally. However, after we got married, it became clear that he wasn't such a wonderful person. In fact, his understanding of marriage and values were completely different from mine, and I had to realize that the hard way. Let me tell you about what happened during our honeymoon. Like the wedding ceremony is an event to become a married couple, then the honeymoon can be considered the first major event as a married couple. Naturally, my heart was filled with happiness. However, at the hotel where we were staying, my husband suddenly tried to have a conversation, or rather a decision, about our future finances. After the honeymoon, we were planning to rent an apartment near the station, and he suggested that we split everything, including rent, utility bills, and even food expenses. Currently, there isn't a significant income difference between my husband and me, so I wouldn't have a problem with this decision. But if we're going to live together in the future as a family, shouldn't we consider our incomes and manage everything together while considering the future? And on top of that, he didn't even bother to ask for my opinion and just said, "I have something to discuss." Please don't approach me with such talks if you're not going to listen to my idea. My husband's talk didn't end there. Furthermore, expenses for maintaining the car, insurance, personal expenses like mobile phones, all should be paid individually. Also, don't change the beneficiary of the life insurance policy you're currently enrolled in. Got it? He said that in a clearly condescending manner. In a way, it could be taken as equal treatment, but for me, who considered a married couple as a unit in shared living, it felt like our status as a couple was being denied. I had generally thought that we would combine our salaries and manage daily life while saving for the future as a family. So being declared separate in everything by my husband was quite shocking. Moreover, even if things are fine so far, both of us will likely face illnesses, and if we have children, with pregnancy, childbirth, and raising a child, the balance of income will definitely be disrupted. It's impossible to split everything equally. I was angry at my husband's one-sided arguments, so I confronted him with a firm tone and questioned him about those things. Ipsolity. In response, my husband said, "Until you can convince me that you didn't marry me for my family's assets, no matter what the situation, I will do things this way. I mean, your family and my family are on completely different levels. It's only natural for me to be cautious, right?" He said, surprising me with his statement. I was halfway in confusion and exclaimed, "Wait a minute. It was you who said that I don't have to worry about our family's differences. Else, and if you thought I couldn't be trusted, then we shouldn't have gotten married in the first place." I shouted. My husband smirked and said, "It is so natural that the situation changes between being lovers and being a married couple. Marriage isn't just about ideals. Besides, there are plenty of women who change after getting married. Ex-Muncie, it's only natural to observe and see how things go after marriage." Our conversation was completely at odds. In fact, if anyone has changed after marriage, it's him. Could he be completely unaware of it? I never predicted that our values and perspectives could be so different. Even after our honeymoon, I continued to be disappointed by his words and actions. He was greedy with money and had a reckless spending habit, the worst combination. Even when we occasionally went out for dinner as a couple, it was always split evenly. And if we went on a date in his car, he would ask me to contribute for the gasoline. Before marriage, he used to cover the expenses himself, and I didn't demand anything. It was just that he refused to let me pay. At times, it's necessary to save face for a man, or so I thought. If he asked, I would have paid. But even after marriage, keeping separate accounts for everything, am I the only one feeling lonely about this? That's why I can never quit my job. I worked hard to save money diligently. After hearing my husband's words, I started using contraception. Even if I don't get pregnant, there's still a possibility of getting sick. At this point, I was convinced that my husband would demand to split everything, even if I couldn't work. At this point, thus on his part, once he paid his share, he freely spent the remaining money. If he fell short, he would even go to his parents' house to ask for an allowance. He's relying on his parents' money, not me. Before suspecting others, he should first reflect on his own actions. I didn't want to continue living like this, so one day, I opened up and said, "Hey, can we even call this married life? I don't feel like I've married you even a little bit." Then with a mocking smile, my husband responds, "If you don't like that, then hurry up and convince me that you're not just after my family's assets." Still using contraception. It's like you don't intend to become a part of me and my family's assets. Because let's have Triaclesis. I become annoyed and ask a natural question. So if I get pregnant, will you change our current lifestyle? My husband's smile deepens, and he replies, "We'll think about that when the time comes." It's a separate issue from this? What a crazy answer. I can't understand the logic of considering contraception a matter of trust and then treating pregnancy as a separate issue. And what's worse about this husband? Despite splitting the finances equally, he had been pushing all the household chores onto me. I couldn't accept his previous words. So around 2 months after we got married, I made a clear declaration. If you're going to continue with that attitude, then I'll take everything as your responsibility. Take care of your own things, okay? I stopped cooking for him, doing his laundry, and cleaning his personal space. Of course, I also stopped making his lunch, and we had no sex. Of course, my husband complained, but I retorted, "This is what you wanted, isn't it? You brought it upon yourself." We continued in a state that could be called an internal separation in our household for 5 years. I can't help but think how foolish I was, but he's the person I married out of love. He should understand the reason why I'm angry, so I continued to hold on to the faint hope that he would reconsider and return to the man he was before we got married. But I soon realized that miracles don't happen to those who hold such naive thoughts. Finally, my mental state couldn't bear this life anymore, and I decided to get a divorce. I had never talked to my mother about our married life before, but now I felt like I had to tell her everything. She might have realized that things weren't going well, though. It was difficult for me to have this conversation with my mother, but I might bother her in the future, and she is the only family I have, and I didn't have the fortune of a good marriage partner. I was determined to talk it through properly, and so after talking with my mother, I changed my mind about getting an immediate divorce and decided to postpone it for a few months. It wasn't because my mother persuaded me not to divorce. In fact, she was in favor of it. She even said she would let me live with her. I just needed to know my mother's schedule, and that's why I postponed the divorce. If I'm going to get divorced anyway, I thought I should seek revenge against my husband, who took away precious time from me. It may be something small, but still. A husband who doesn't consider my feelings at all seems completely oblivious to the fact that I've made up my mind about divorce. One day, he casually brings a friend home, and they start drinking together. A slightly tipsy friend suggests, "Why don't you join us too?" It's troublesome, but my husband says nothing. Apparently, he hasn't talked to his friends about our separation under the same roof. Well, that's expected, isn't it? Everything we're told to a third party from the beginning, even a fool would know who would be criticized. If my husband were to talk to his friend, it would only be convenient lies for himself. I didn't want to go along with it, but I know my friend means no harm. So I sit next to my husband and said, "I have something to do, so just one drink." I thought I was being considerate. And if my husband hasn't mentioned it, it's better not to give the impression that our relationship is bad. It's convenient for my husband, isn't it? But my foolish husband tramples over my consideration without even noticing. My wife's family is laughably poor. She married me to get my money. Scary woman, isn't she? I seriously considered punching him. Lies and my husband's delusions are mixed in. I grew up in a single-parent family, and my mother has faced a lot of hardships. However, I have been able to attend university, so we cannot be considered economically disadvantaged. Moreover, the notion that I'm after my husband's family assets is a delusion that has persisted for 5 years. Even if he's drunk, he shouldn't say such things in front of me, right? If my husband wants it that way, I say to him, what delusions are you fostering? If you think I'm after money, why don't we get a divorce? I'll gladly sign the papers anytime. Do you think I would cry and beg if you brought up the topic of divorce? You have absolutely no charm, not a trace of it. The reason I didn't bring up divorce first was that I was waiting for you to become a decent human being again. Well, you've completely betrayed my expectations. And I said it harshly. My husband shouted in a strange voice and hit me. He was drunk and it was an awkward position, so it didn't hurt much. My friend quickly intervened as well. I stood up, threw a cold stare at my husband and said, if you get angry at my response, you shouldn't have started the fight in the first place. And I spat out those words before retreating to my room. Within less than a month from that day, I was informed of the sudden passing of my father-in-law. Thus, with his death, various hidden truths about the in-law family came to light. It seems that my father-in-law had failed in business and was heavily in debt. Although he had skillfully hidden it from the family, it was exposed after his death, and they had no choice but to dispose of the properties and assets. Eventually, my husband received only around $20,000 as inheritance. It was a significant disappointment for him. He'd been relying on the family assets and living extravagantly without saving. Texting in a mocking tone, I advised him, if you don't lower your living standards, you won't be able to survive. In response, he resorted to violence again. This time, he wasn't drunk, but when I pretended to get angry and swung a chair, he fled to the bedroom. Afterward, my husband tried to make amends, but it was too late and laughable. He even tried to inquire about my savings, exposing his money-oriented intentions. Of course, I didn't tell him, and as time went on, the timing for the divorce I had been waiting for arrived. It may be regrettable for my father-in-law, but his passing created a favorable environment that would torment my husband. Faced with the divorce situation settled, and as a celebration of my birthday, I presented the divorce papers to my husband as throwing a cold gaze at him. I said, I'm going to start my life anew. I've wasted 5 years being bound by your rules. That's enough, don't you think? I thought he might attack me again, but maybe he learned his lesson during our recent encounters. My husband slumped in disappointment right there and then. No division of property or anything. Just a divorce. Surprisingly, my husband readily agreed to the divorce. But the loss of his dependable in-law family, his spirit seemed to have been crushed. What a pathetic person. He used to be so confident as long as he had his in-laws. The divorce alone must have been a sufficient shock to him. But now that my husband is economically declining and left with no choice, there's another thing that brings me joy. The day after I made him sign the divorce papers, I arranged for movers to transport my belongings to my new place. My husband seemed stunned as he hadn't expected me to leave in just one day. I had been preparing for this day for a while. From now on, I'll live with my mother, but not at my parents' heats. The land where my parents' house stood became subject to redevelopment, and when I informed my mother of my decision to divorce, they were in the midst of negotiating the relocation. By the time my father-in-law passed away, we managed to sell the property at the desired price, and my mother had already moved to a different place, considering that she would live with me. My husband had no interest in my parents' house, and he never noticed that a large sum of money he loved was in motion. While the movers were handling the belongings, it seems like he wanted to call my mother. Wanted to call my mother, but she had already changed her phone number. By the way, my number, which my husband knew, doesn't connect anymore. It has already been changed. Of course, I have no intention of giving him the new address. I made sure to instruct the movers not to leak the new address due to the divorce, ignoring my husband, who pleaded for me not to leave. I headed to the city office to submit the divorce papers. At the end of the year, 2 months after the divorce, I heard through hearsay that my ex-husband is still living in that apartment, where it would be difficult for him to afford the payments alone. So, I planned to send a New Year's card with a printed photo of me, making a V sign in front of my new condominium. I'll make sure to send it from a completely different location to prevent the new address from being identified through the postmark. And of course, it's nothing but a sarcastic gesture. Actions, I admit it's a malicious prank, but after experiencing violence twice and being wasted for 5 years, I feel like I can let this kind of revenge go unnoticed by God,